Hi, I'm Lorella. Let's talk about 3 ways you can store your onions long term. Because of the drought that we had this summer, my onions drooped and died off basically early. And so I've harvested these onions a lot smaller than I normally would. I still ended up with a pretty good harvest, but I need to store them for use in winter. After harvesting the onions, I put them on a rack in my laundry room, which also doubles as my seed starting room, to cure. And they've been in there for a few weeks. What you're looking for is that there's a paper-like quality to the outside skin of the onion, and that the hairs and the neck are also fully dried out. I guess these are really roots, not hairs, but to me they look like little hairs. So these are good to go. And during that time, any of them that aren't good will have little soft spots, so you want to take any of those out. The first way that you can store these onions is in a basket, and basically you're just going to leave it just whole like this. If you have really long necks, you might want to trim them down. Just store them in here like this. If I've got any dirt that's at all wet, you want to make sure the dirt is off, but you want to leave the paper skin on the outside edge. It's actually going to protect your onion on the inside. That one's not good. We'll separate it out. If I were storing big slicing onions, this might be a method that I would use. You can use, in place of a basket, you could use a net bag. You could reuse the bags that you buy onions in from the store, or avocados, you know, those net bags, so that they just need to have lots of airflow. Then you would put this in a dark, dry place, and they'll store for several months using this method. As long as there's good airflow, the humidity isn't very high, and it's cool. The temperature needs to be somewhere in the 50-60 degree range. I don't have a really great place to do that. I have a room that I could probably keep that cool. I'm not sure about the humidity though. We live in a very high humid area, or an area with high humidity. So this is not my preferred method. It does work great for many people though, and it's probably the easiest of all of these 3. I love having a prep bowl handy so that I can put scraps, veggie scraps into it right away, and they can either go out to the animals or to the compost bin depending on what it is. Onions, animals don't really like, so these are going to go straight to the compost bin. I even think onions might not really be good for your animals, but I don't know if that is just something I think or if that's real. So I'm going to keep chopping onions until I have enough. You could measure this if you want to know the exact amount that you have going into each baggie. For me, I know about what we put into a normal recipe. And then I'm going to lay these flat in the freezer. Well, first I'll squeeze the air out as much as I can. And I guess if you had smaller size freezer bags, you could use them as well. Like if you had a snack size freezer bag. Anything like that will work, or other containers. These work good for me. I'll press this down, I'll press the air out as much as I can, I'll press it into a single layer, I'll lay it flat in the freezer, and then once it's frozen, I can stand it up and store it just like I do my rabbit broth, ham broth, and beef broth that I make. Onions can be stored in the freezer for several months at a time before they'll start to get freezer burn. Frozen veggies are great in recipes. Anything that's going to be cooked, you can use these. You do not want to put them in your salads or anything where you want raw onions, because the texture is going to change. They're going to be a little bit softer. They're not going to be quite the same as having a raw onion. But they'll be good in soups, stir fries, scrambles, meatloaf, anything, tacos, anything you would cook onions in, you can use them just like you would an onion that you had fresh from the store. Run a little bit. Did you know that you can stick onions in the freezer for a few minutes before you're ready to cut them, and then they won't have that strong sulfuric acid smell released? when you cut them, and then they won't make you cry as much. I used to be super sensitive to the smell of onions. We didn't cook with onions growing up much. I started dating my husband, my then boyfriend, who's now my husband, and his family cooked with onions all the time. And so I would be in the living room and his mom would be in the kitchen chopping onions, and I would start, like, my eyes would start burning and my nose would start running. It was really bad, but I've kind of gotten used to it. I'm not as sensitive to it as I used to be over the years, unless they're just really super strong. The third method of long-term onion storage that I'm going to talk about today, and the one that I'm going to be using for these onions, is dehydrating. Because the dehydrators have screens for lots of airflow, I'm not going to dice these. I'm going to simply slice them in flat, round circles so that they don't fall through the holes, and they'll shrink up some as they are dehydrating, as they're drying. So I'm not concerned about leaving them too big. I can always cut them smaller when I'm ready to add them to a soup or whatever, however I want to use them, when I'm ready to reconstitute them. And if I store these dehydrated onions airtight, they'll last a really long time. You know, if these were bigger, I would not be taking the time to do this. I can tell you right now, this is time consuming, but I just don't think these are going to store great. But they'll be good for use like this, out of the dehydrator, out of the freezer. There we go. That's using your smarts. On my glasses at some point, didn't I? Can't really see without them, but they reflect all the lights. They reflect all the lights, so I often don't wear them when I'm making videos, but now I just realized I can actually see the onions I'm working with, so I'll probably keep them on. I have found that most of the things that need to be done on the homestead are not difficult. They're just time consuming. And that if I can learn to manage my time, I can get a lot more done than I think I can. Dehydrated onions have a shelf life of 10 to 15 years if stored correctly. So these will last me a long time. I'm still using an inexpensive Presto dehydrator that my mom gave me, and I did a review on it a couple years ago. So check out this video right here if you want to know more about what I think about this dehydrator.